The apartment trembled as Laura held her son close, her scream piercing the silence and slicing through the dim evening light. David stood near the doorway, his face twisted in anger as he shouted, "You'll regret this, Laura!" She tightened her arms around Ethan, her heart pounding as the sound of his heavy boots thundered toward the exit. The slam of the door cracked like a gunshot, and her world crumbled further as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Fear burned her chest, yet Ethan whispered, "Mom, are we safe?" Laura forced a trembling smile, whispering back, "Ice baby, I won't let anything hurt you." But inside, panic consumed her. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night spent holding her child had been for this, and now betrayal threatened it all. Shadows from her past swirled in her mind like ghosts. David's betrayal wasn't just abandonment, it was war. Laura pressed her cheek to Ethan's hair, vowing silently to fight, no matter the cost. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by her ragged breathing and Ethan's tiny sobs. Laura sat on the couch, clutching Ethan's hand, her thoughts racing. The apartment smelled faintly of rain drifting through a cracked window. She whispered, "I promise, Ethan, I'll keep us safe." He nodded weakly, trying to be brave, though fear lingered in his eyes. Memories of her sacrifices pressed into her chest, the long nights of double shifts, the loneliness, and the betrayal that had shattered her heart. She thought of the future and the fight ahead, but she also felt the weight of exhaustion pulling her down. Her body ached, her spirit frayed, yet her love for her son burned stronger than her fear. The silence pressed in until Laura heard Ethan whisper, "Why was Dad so angry?" Her chest tightened. She answered softly, "Because he doesn't understand us." She wanted to shield Ethan from the truth, but could feel his innocence fading. Shadows danced along the walls, reminding her of every time she had faced betrayal. Yet tonight felt different. Her heart knew this was only the beginning of a storm. Still, she smiled weakly and kissed Ethan's forehead, whispering, "We'll find our way no matter what comes." As Ethan drifted to sleep against her lap, Laura stared into the dark corner of the room, her mind replaying David's furious face. She whispered into the silence, "You won't take him from me." Her jaw tightened with resolve, fear twisting into determination. Every scar, every night she had spent alone, had led to this moment. She realized she had more strength than she had ever known. And though the fight ahead terrified her, the thought of losing Ethan fueled her fire. Rain pattered against the glass as Laura finally rose, carrying Ethan to his bedroom. She tucked him under the blankets, brushing his hair with trembling fingers. She whispered, "Sleep, my love. Tomorrow we begin again." Standing at his door, she pressed her palm against it in silent vow. Though her chest was heavy with sorrow, her spirit refused to break. She turned toward the darkened living room, the storm inside her heart echoing the storm outside. Tonight had ended in betrayal, but tomorrow would begin with strength. Morning light spilled into the apartment, but Laura felt no warmth as she prepared breakfast with trembling hands. Ethan sat quietly at the table, pushing cereal around his bowl, his innocence bruised by fear. She forced a smile and said, "Eat, sweetheart. We need our strength today." His eyes lifted, searching hers, and he whispered, "Are they coming back?" Laura's chest ached. "No," she said firmly, "not if I can help it." But behind her calm tone, doubt screamed. Bills stacked on the counter taunted her. Work had grown unstable, whispers of layoffs carried through the office corridors. She had fought so hard to build stability, yet everything was crumbling at once. She brushed a strand of hair back and tried to breathe. "I'll find a way," she told herself silently, clinging to her resolve. The world was threatening to tear her apart, but her love for Ethan refused to falter. At the office, fluorescent lights hummed above as Laura sat rigid at her desk. Papers piled high, her hands shook slightly as she typed. A coworker leaned close, whispering, "They're cutting positions, Laura. Be careful." Panic surged in her veins. She needed this job, not just for herself but for Ethan. Her supervisor's gaze from across the room felt sharp, cold, calculating. She forced herself to breathe, whispering under her breath, "You can't take this from me too." Her heart raced as memories of David's threats resurfaced. If she lost this job, his case for custody would only grow stronger. She clenched her jaw and tapped harder on the keys, as if each keystroke were a battle cry. She couldn't afford to crumble. That night, her best friend Sarah arrived, knocking softly before letting herself in. "You look exhausted," Sarah said gently, setting down takeout. Laura sighed. "I can't lose this job, Sarah. Everything depends on it." Sarah's eyes softened. "You've carried the world alone for too long. Let me help." Laura shook her head, whispering, "I don't want to be a burden." Ethan peeked from his room, sensing the tension, his small face drawn with worry. Sarah crouched to his level, smiling softly. "Your mom is stronger than she knows, Ethan." Laura's heart swelled and ached at once. She had support, but the fear of losing control still gnawed at her. Later, when Ethan was asleep, Laura confided in Sarah, her voice trembling. "David won't stop. He'll use everything against me. The job, the bills, even the long hours I work." Sarah's eyes sharpened. "Then you fight back. You've sacrificed everything for Ethan, and no one can take that from you." Laura's throat tightened, emotion choking her words. "What if I'm not enough?" Sarah leaned forward, voice fierce. "You're more than enough, Laura. You always have been." Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of her strength being seen, not just her struggle. As dawn neared, Laura lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every thought clawed at her. David's threats, her unstable job, Ethan's fragile hope. Her chest felt heavy, yet underneath it, all burned a steady flame. She whispered to the darkness, "I won't let him win." She rolled onto her side, gazing at Ethan, sleeping peacefully beside her. His small hand rested against hers, warm and trusting. A tear slipped down her cheek as she kissed his forehead. Her resolve hardened. No matter how broken she felt, she would rise each day and fight again. Tomorrow would be another battle, but she would not surrender. The courtroom loomed large as Laura sat at a wooden bench, Ethan's future echoing in every heartbeat. David entered with his lawyer, eyes cold, lips curled with triumph. Laura's chest tightened, but she kept her gaze steady. The judge shuffled papers, his voice sharp. "We are here to determine custody arrangements." Fear pressed on Laura, but she whispered to herself, "You will not take him from me." David's attorney smirked, tossing accusations into the air like daggers. "She works too many hours. She cannot provide stability." Each word stabbed at her. Laura's lawyer leaned close, murmuring, "Stay calm, we'll expose his lies." Laura's breath shook, yet her will held. She had no choice but to fight, even as her hands trembled in her lap. Ethan's smile, his little laugh, his whispered promises gave her strength. That evening, Laura returned home, exhaustion heavy in her steps. Ethan rushed to her side, hugging her tightly. "Mom, are they making you sad?" he asked softly. Laura smiled, faintly, kneeling down. "I'm okay, Ethan. I just have to be strong." His small hands clung to her shoulders. "I'll be strong too," he whispered, voice quivering. Tears filled her eyes. In his innocence, Ethan carried strength beyond his years. She kissed his forehead. "We'll get through this together." The weight of the battle ahead loomed large, but in that moment, love drowned out fear. The next day at work, whispers swirled around her desk. Laura overheard coworkers murmuring about her custody case. Shame burned her cheeks, but she forced her focus onto the screen. Her supervisor approached, his tone sharp. "We need you present, not distracted." She swallowed her pride, answering, "Yes, sir." The words tasted bitter, but she knew she could not falter. Every paycheck meant security. Every hour meant keeping Ethan safe. Her world was fragile, but her determination refused to break. Even surrounded by doubt and scrutiny, she clung to her resolve. Late that night, Laura sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out, bills, legal documents, reminders of her fragile world. Sarah leaned against the counter, concern etched across her face. "You can't keep carrying this alone," Sarah said gently. Laura shook her head. "I have to. If I falter, Ethan suffers." Sarah moved closer, voice firm. "Then let me help. You don't have to fight every battle by yourself." Laura's hands trembled as she gripped a letter, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm terrified, Sarah." Sarah placed a hand over hers. "That's why I'm here." As Laura tucked Ethan into bed, his small voice asked, "Mom, will Dad take me away?" Her chest constricted, but she steadied her voice. "No, Ethan. I'll never let that happen." His eyes brimmed with tears as he whispered, "Promise." She pressed her hand gently to his cheek. "I promise, my love." His breathing softened as sleep took him, but Laura remained by his side, her hand still resting on his. In the quiet, she vowed again to fight with everything she had. Fear lingered, but love was stronger. The night was heavy with silence, as Laura opened an old box tucked beneath her bed. Inside lay faded photographs and letters she had sworn never to revisit. Her hands trembled as memories surged, a younger version of herself, smiling beside David when life had felt full of promise. She whispered bitterly, "How could I have trusted you?" The sound of Ethan's soft breathing from the next room anchored her, but the ghosts refused to let go. One letter caught her eye, written in David's cruel handwriting, reminding her of broken promises and lies. Tears blurred her vision, but her anger hardened. She slammed the box shut, whispering fiercely, "You will not haunt me anymore." Yet her chest burned with dread. The past was no longer buried, it was clawing back into her present. At work the next day, Laura's breath caught as David appeared in the lobby, waiting with his lawyer. His voice cut sharp across the polished floor. "Laura, this isn't over." People turned to watch, their whispers buzzing like bees. She froze, Ethan's safety flashing in her mind like a beacon. Her lawyer stepped between them, saying firmly, "This isn't the place." David's smirk widened. "Every weakness you have, Laura, I'll use against you." Her stomach knotted, but she steadied her gaze. "You've underestimated me before," she said under her breath. Still, fear scraped against her ribs, reminding her of how easily he could manipulate. That evening, Sarah visited again, but this time her expression carried hesitation. She admitted, "Laura, I knew David was planning custody before you did." Shock pierced Laura like ice. "You knew and didn't tell me?" Her voice cracked with betrayal. Sarah's eyes filled with regret. "I thought he'd change his mind, that it wouldn't reach this point." Laura turned away, her heart breaking anew. "You were supposed to be my friend, Sarah. How could you hide this from me?" Silence stretched, heavy and bitter. For Laura, the walls were closing in. Trust had been shattered, and betrayal no longer came only from her ex-husband, but from the person she leaned on most. Later that night, unable to sleep, Laura wandered into the kitchen and stared at the empty chair across the table. A memory flooded back, her late mother's voice urging strength, reminding her to never back down. Tears welled as she whispered, "I need you now more than ever." The ghost of the past wrapped around her, not as comfort but as a reminder of her own fragility. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "I won't fail Ethan," she vowed aloud, though her voice shook. The past was suffocating her, but it also fueled her fire. She had survived before, and she would survive again, even if the scars deepened. As dawn approached, Laura sat at Ethan's bedside, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Ethan stirred, whispering, "Mom, did you have bad dreams?" She forced a weak smile. "Something like that, sweetheart." His small hand reached for hers, grounding her in reality. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'll protect you, no matter what happens." Ethan's eyes drifted shut again, but Laura stayed awake, her mind a battlefield of past wounds and present fears. The shadows of betrayal threatened to break her, yet holding Ethan's hand reminded her why she would never give up. In that fragile silence, her resolve strengthened again. she would face whatever darkness came. Rain tapped the window as Laura sorted mail, her pulse hitching at a handwritten envelope. She traced the unfamiliar signature and whispered, "Grace Harper." "Why now?" Ethan played nearby, humming softly to himself. The letter spoke of family debt and mistakes that never heal. It said, "I have watched from a distance, and it is time to help." Laura felt anger rise, tangled with sudden hope that scared her. She steadied her breath and said, "If you know what we faced, you should have come sooner." The phone number at the bottom pulled like a magnet on her fear. She dialed, and a calm voice answered, "Laura, I'm sorry for vanishing." Laura stared at the rain and said, "Talk is not enough anymore." The voice replied, "I have records David hid, and I can prove it." Silence filled the room as Ethan looked up for reassurance. Laura said, "If this is real, meet me tonight." The diner smelled of coffee and old secrets as Laura slid into a booth. A woman rose, eyes careful, and said, "I am Grace, your aunt." Laura kept her voice level and said, "You left us when we needed you." Grace flinched, then set a folder between the cups. She said, "I stayed away, but I never stopped watching." Laura opened the folder and saw bank statements and messages that undercut David's claims. She felt heat surge as shame and relief collided in her chest. Grace said, "He hid income and altered his hours to paint you unstable." Laura looked up and asked, "Why help me now?" Grace folded her hands and said, "Because I failed your mother, and I will not fail you." Laura touched a page and felt her resolve sharpen. She said, "If we use this, there is no going back." Grace spoke softly and said, "There is a catch." Laura's hands stilled above the evidence. Grace continued, "To use this, you must testify about the night you hid his bruising words." Laura's throat tightened at the memory she had buried for years. She said, "I kept quiet to protect Ethan from shame." Grace nodded and said, "Silence protected him then, but truth protects him now." Laura felt the room tilt with the weight of her choice. The documents were a lifeline, but they demanded courage she feared had run dry. Grace slid a card across and said, "This attorney can file tomorrow." Laura pressed her fingers to the table and said, "I will tell the court what he did, all of it." Grace exhaled and whispered, "Then we begin tonight." Back home, Sarah waited by the door with worry that would not settle. She said, "You vanished after work. I was scared." Laura set the folder down and said, "I met my aunt, and she has proof." Sarah's face shifted from doubt to guarded hope. She said, "Can you trust her after so long?" Laura answered, "Trust is a luxury, but evidence is power." Sarah opened the folder and read in silence as the room grew very still. She said, "This could change everything, but it will expose you." Laura nodded and said, "I must speak the whole truth." Sarah reached for her hand and said, "Then I stand with you, even if it costs us sleep and pride." Laura felt something unclench and said, "We move now while the fear is loud." Before dawn, Laura drafted her statement while the city held its breath. She wrote the words she had feared, and each line felt like skin shedding. She said aloud, "I will not be defined by what he hid." Ethan stirred in the next room, and she paused to listen. She felt the ache of past silence shifting to strength that surprised her. Grace texted, "Attorney at 8, I will drive." Laura replied, "I am ready to file." She gathered documents, photographs, and the courage the night had forged. Sarah packed a thermos and said, "We go together." Laura slipped the statement into a folder and whispered, "We will be heard." The sky brightened, and a new battle began. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as Laura sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly to hide the tremor in her fingers. David leaned back smugly, his lawyer flipping through files with calculated precision. The judge called the case to order, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Laura's lawyer stood and said, "We will present evidence that exposes lies about David's finances and character." Laura's heart thumped wildly as she glanced toward Ethan in the gallery, his small face watching her with quiet faith. Her throat tightened, but she held her head high. David smirked, whispering to his lawyer, "She's desperate, this won't stick." Laura closed her eyes briefly and whispered inside, "I am not afraid anymore." For the first time in years, she felt her voice preparing to rise above fear. Laura's lawyer presented bank records from Grace, pointing to concealed income streams David had hidden. Gasps rippled across the courtroom as numbers were read aloud. David's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. David's jaw tightened, and a vein pulsed at his temple. Laura whispered to herself, "Truth will be louder than his lies." She clenched her fists under the table, each paper flashing like a weapon she had not known she possessed. Grace sat in the back, her steady eyes giving silent strength. Laura felt shame fade and steel rise in its place. For so long she had carried fear, but in this moment, truth was her ally. When asked to testify, Laura rose, her legs weak, but her voice steady. She recounted nights of David's cruelty, the verbal assaults that had carved scars she never showed. Gasps filled the courtroom, and David slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "Lies!" The judge banged the gavel sharply, "Control yourself." Laura inhaled deeply, her voice cracking but strong. "I stayed silent to protect my son, but silence no longer protects him." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at Ethan, who nodded faintly, his eyes shimmering with pride. In that instant, Laura felt her fear melt into defiance. The climax reached fever pitch when David's lies collapsed under the evidence. His lawyer's confidence faltered as Laura's testimony cut through the courtroom like glass. Laura's attorney said firmly, "This woman has endured sacrifice after sacrifice, and she stands here not for herself, but for her child." The judge leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Mr. Harper, your deception is noted. We will deliberate custody based on truth, not manipulation." David sank into his chair, face pale, eyes burning with humiliation. Laura exhaled a breath she had held for years, whispering softly, "We are almost free, Ethan." The session ended with gavel's final strike, echoing like thunder in Laura's chest. Outside the courthouse, she clutched Ethan's hand as cameras flashed and questions flew. She ignored them all, whispering to Ethan, "You were my courage in there." He smiled faintly and said, "I knew you could do it, Mom." Grace walked beside them, her face weary but relieved. Sarah hurried up, embracing Laura with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said firmly. Laura nodded, still trembling. The war was not finished, but the battle had turned. She lifted Ethan into her arms, kissed his hair and whispered, "We are almost free." The city noise roared, but for the first time in years, Laura heard only hope. The verdict came swift and final. Laura sat frozen as the judge declared, "Custody is awarded to the mother, Laura Harper." Her breath caught in her chest as Ethan clapped his tiny hands, smiling with relief. David's face twisted with rage, but the words were undeniable. Laura's heart pounded, years of fear unraveling into quiet triumph. She whispered to herself, "It's over." Grace pressed a steady hand to her shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Sarah wiped tears, smiling through sobs. Laura's lawyer leaned close and said softly, "This is your victory, Laura." She turned her gaze to Ethan, who mouthed silently, "We're free." Laura exhaled, the weight of the world lifting at last, though her body trembled from exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, freer. Reporters crowded, but Laura shielded Ethan close and ignored the flashing cameras. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, guiding him down the steps. Sarah linked her arm through Laura's and said, "Let them see strength, not fear." Grace followed, her face lined with both relief and regret. Laura lifted her chin, every step proof that she had not broken. Ethan whispered, "Mom, everyone's watching us." Laura smiled softly and said, "Let them, we have nothing to hide." In that moment, the chaos of the crowd blurred, and only the bond between mother and son remained sharp, unshakable. That evening, Laura cooked a simple dinner while Ethan set the table, his laughter ringing bright through the apartment. The walls, once heavy with fear, now carried a gentler weight. Sarah joined them with wine, while Grace helped Ethan fold napkins. Laura looked around the table and whispered, "This feels new." Sarah smiled. "It's called peace." Grace lowered her gaze, voice quiet. "I can never give back what was lost, but I will stand with you now." Laura reached for Ethan's hand as he grinned wide. "We're stronger now," she said, her voice steady, filled with the kind of hope she had once thought impossible. Later that night, Laura stood on the balcony. The city spread beneath her, alive with glowing lights. Sarah leaned against the doorway, saying softly, "It's different tonight, isn't it?" Laura nodded, clutching a mug of tea. "The storm has passed," she whispered, "but the scars remain." Grace joined them, her voice low. "Scars are proof of survival." Laura smiled faintly, watching Ethan through the window as he played with his toys. "For him, I'll carry them all," she said. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "And we'll carry them with you." For the first time, Laura believed the road ahead was no longer hers to walk alone. In the quiet of Ethan's bedroom, Laura tucked him in, brushing his blonde hair back gently. He whispered, "Mom, we're safe now, right?" Laura pressed a kiss to his forehead and said softly, "Ice, baby. We're safe." She placed her palm on the door before leaving, whispering a vow. We'll be okay." She moved to the kitchen window, staring out at a dawn just beginning to rise, painting the sky with pale pinks. She whispered to herself, "We are stronger now, and we'll never stop fighting." Her smile was real, unmasked, carrying both scars and hope. For the first time in years, she believed in tomorrow.